Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the incident of violence in Brazil last week. Now, supporters of Brazil's far-right former President Jair Bolsonaro invaded and defaced the country's Congress, presidential palace and Supreme Court on Sunday in a similar manner as U.S. Capitol invasion 2 years ago by supporters of former U.S. President Donald Trump. Rioters in Brazil left a trail of destruction, throwing furniture through the smashed windows of the presidential palace, flooding parts of the Congress as well with a sprinkler system, and ransacking ceremonial rooms in the Supreme Court. Now, Bolsonaro had lost the presidential election to Lula da Silva in October last year. Following Sunday's violence, President Lula has announced a federal security intervention in Brasilia till 31st of January. Now, the former president, who has rarely spoken in public since losing the election, refuted all the allegations against him and said peaceful demonstrations are part of democracy, but invading and damaging public buildings crosses the line. So today we're going to talk about this incident which has happened in Brazil and also similar incidents which have been witnessed across the globe in various other nations in the past few years, the rationale behind them, reasonings behind them, and how the mandate, people's mandate, needs to be respected and defended as well. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Ms. Ruchita Berry is joining us here in the studio. She's a senior research associate with the IDSA. Welcome, Ms. Berry. We're also joined by former Ambassador Yogesh Gupta and retired Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, who's director of India Foundation. Welcome, both of you gentlemen, as well to Sansad Television. I'll start with you, Ruchita. Let's first start by understanding what's happening in Brazil. Was this something which was anticipated because of the kind of pull and push which was happening between the supporters of the former president and the current President Lula da Silva, and also the kind of statements which had come in from the former President Bolsonaro?
Well, thank you for inviting me, first of all. See, this is a very complex situation in Brazil at the moment, and you're very right when you say that there can be parallels drawn between what happened in Brazil on Sunday when the former President Bolsonaro supported raided the Congress, the Supreme Court and the presidential palace. They destroyed the furniture, basically trashed a lot of the entire place. This was similar to what happened in US 2 years back when President Trump's supporters went into the Capitol and did all kinds of things over there. So, first of all, let me say that Bolsonaro was seen, he used to mirror himself as, he used to see himself as a mirror of President Trump, So, he was also known as the Trump of the tropics. So, a lot of things that were happening in Brazil, you found that they were also happening in US or the vice versa. So I'm not surprised with this kind of event taking place in Brazil. That is one, the comparison between Trump and Bolsonaro.
Okay.
Secondly, the Brazil as a whole has gone through elections recently, and Lula has emerged as the winner. And right from the beginning, the moment the elections in October took place, Bolsonaro and his supporters have been very much against the election verdict, not accepting the election verdict as it was. So there were murmurs about, that there was a lot of contestation happening about not accepting the election verdict. So that resulted in this kind of an episode. So there is some kind of polarization in the Brazilian politics today between the supporters of Bolsonaro and those of Lula. But this also created a security situation. How can a country's capital be invaded in such a way with supporters of a particular party, creating such a big security issue within the country. You know? So,
Okay.
what were the security forces doing there? Why wasn't this thought of earlier? Now, President Lula is taking steps to avoid that happening in future, but that really leaves us with a lot of questions about security in the country as such, because Brazil does not have this kind of history of.
Okay. Okay, that's an important point, and that brings me to Ambassador Gupta here. Ambassador Gupta, you spent time in Brazil. What we would like to understand, as Ms. Berry is pointing out, in terms of how does it happen in Brazil? In terms of the transition of power, is this something the kind of incident which we have witnessed, or the kind of the polarization between the far right and the far left is sort of a recent phenomena, or over the years, how is Brazilian political democracy developed?
Earlier, Brazil was sort of governed by the military from the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And then after 1990, we had this progress towards the electoral politics. And then we had these, 2, 3 main parties, and there was hope that the political situation would stabilize. But what we have seen in recent years is that both the Workers' Party of President Lula and the other one, which was headed by President Bolsonaro, they were sort of contesting on different issues, and unfortunately, there were corruption charges against both. So both got very unpopular, while Lula's party did a lot of good work at the beginning of 2000. A lot of poor people were taken out of poverty, and there was good economic growth and so on. But ultimately, he also became embroiled in corruption, and so was his successor. And similarly, there have been allegations of corruption against Bolsonaro also. There are a lot of people who are divided. Some favor the one, or some favor the other. So we have a very polarized kind of electorate, as the former panelist said. And the election results also were very close. In the first round, the difference was only of 5%. And in the second round, the runoff round, it was less than 1%. So it was a very close election, and the President Bolsonaro kind of never accepted the results.
Okay.
And very grudgingly kind of he left Brazil, and his supporters, of course, taking cue from what happened in the United States, have indulged in this kind of behavior, which of course he has condemned. And but this sort of a thing has not happened earlier, but this is more indicative of the increasing polarization.
Okay, okay. General Katoch, there's this overall issue of political, disagreements spilling over into the streets, or in or the supporters of one group or the other, taking out their anger on public institutions, as was witnessed on Sunday in Brazil, 2 years ago in United States as well, and not big countries like them, but we have had incidents in Maldives, around 4 years ago, 5 years ago. The opposition was making a global call for smooth transition of power in their country. These incidents, why do you believe these are becoming more common in the past few years or so?
Thank you, Vishal. Vishal, I've got a slightly different take as to why these incidences take place. One, I believe that for a very long time, there are certain powers which believe in regime change. And because they believe in regime change, as we have seen what has happened in West Asia and in many other places, including in Ukraine, which started from 2004 in the color revolution, because they want a regime which is favorable to their interests, so they create conditions. And one of the means by which they create conditions is by having toolkits, and they create that violence. So this is a phenomenon which we have seen over the last 25, 30, 40 odd years, which is occurring across the world. and the large number of countries, regimes have been changed. But coming down to the present situation, as far as the particular incident which we are talking about now in Brazil. Now, I think Brazil is slightly different because Brazil has got a certain different set of interests. In Brazil, yes, very correctly stated by the ambassador and by Ms. Berry, that the society is divided. They are polarized. But that by itself would not have led to the violence. I think there are deeper factors. There is deep corruption within the judiciary itself, within the police forces, and within the military. And there are huge economic interests attached as far as the Amazon rainforest is concerned, which was being exploited to by the former president, and which was opposed by the present president, President Lula da Silva. Now, when these factors come into play and economics comes into play, then also we find people taking sides and resorting to violence. So I don't think, I personally would not really relate it to occurring because something like this occurred in the United States 2 years ago. But it is a sad state of affairs. And the only positive to it is that the world leaders have condemned it. We have seen the Prime Minister of India has condemned it.
Indeed.
The US President has condemned it. And now even President Bolsonaro, the former president, he's also condemned the violence. So I think perhaps this will settle down. The polarization will remain. But I think we need to set examples as to what good democracy is. And the fundamental of good democracy is when you lose the election, let the other party take over.
Okay.
You will get your chance 5 years later.
Okay.
Vishal.
Okay, indeed. Smooth transition of power is a very important pillar of democracy anywhere. Ms. Berry, on that point, that note, why do you think when we're talking about this particular event, Brazil specifically, the smooth transition of power is not happening? Is one of the major reasons, as General Katoji was referring to, is deep-rooted corruption within the public institutions itself, and then it has been divided into two, segments, into two camps, one in favor of former President Bolsonaro and one in favor of current President Lula da Silva. Is that the main reason, or is there something else happening behind the scenes?
You must understand that in case of corruption in Brazil, it's across board. Both the parties have been involved in corrupt practices, have been accused of corrupt practices. Lula and then his the former president Dilma Rousseff was also had to leave office because of corruption charges. Bolsonaro is also facing corruption charges. So the country is going through a bad time. The economy is in a bad situation. The current president, Lula, though he is from a leftist party, leftist leaning, he is an institution himself. If you look at Lula's political career, he's been there since the 80s, and he's I think contested most of the elections in Brazil since then. In 2018, he was arrested, and people had lost hope of him reviving himself. They thought that he was done and dead in terms of his political career. But he has revived that, and he's back as the president of Brazil. But he's leading a country which is in a very bad state economically. The economy is in a bad state. The inflation is growing. The country is polarized between the far right and the left. So Lula faces the task of bringing all these things together. He also is known for his foreign policy in past. That he was a president who favored talking to the people rather than the isolationists that some of his predecessors were. So is he going to revive that? He has hinted that he is looking for reintegration of the integration of the Latin American region. He's talking about emphasis on multilateralism, reviving ties with countries in the developing world, with Africa in particular, and with the BRICS set of countries. So he has an expansionist agenda in his mind, but he has to remember that he has to take care of his country first. So he cannot move away from the fact that the country is in trouble. There is a lot of there are a lot of people who are looking at him in terms of fixing what's happening within the country before he moves into his grand foreign policy.
Indeed. They'll have to tough task at hand for the government there in Brazil on those fronts. You're right, Ms. Berry. Going back to the larger question, and Mr. Gupta, as all of you are mentioning, we would also like to understand, perhaps in a bit more detail as to dealing with the people's mandate. That's something which is really important and a big aspect of any democratic country. Smooth transition of power. Now, incidents like this and the one happened in the United States of America 2 years ago, and some other incidents which have happened in various other countries on a similar note, they do raise questions about why those in power for a certain period of time are not able to deal with the people's mandate if it is against them, and two, how can that be assured or ensured in in those nations or globally where democratic institutions are in place?
Well, this is a phenomena that spans across many countries. And the problem is that certain number of people, are not very happy with the kind of leftist policy or the popular politics that has been witnessed earlier. We have seen this in the United States. We have seen this in certain parts of Europe. And now we see here in Brazil that people who are not happy with or they feel marginalized, then they resort to this kind of violence, this kind of politics. And what happened in the United States 2 years earlier kind of has become some sort of an example for these right-wing followers or right-wing protesters, and they think that this is now the normal, the new normal, and they indulge in this sort of a violence to express their protest, express their disagreements. Unfortunately, polarization is increasing, not only in Brazil, but across many other countries, and it really needs or it really calls for more of a dialogue, more of understanding, but with the two extreme side of views. But these things, unfortunately, are easier to say, but they are not easier to achieve. And as far as Brazil is concerned, I think one of the underlying reasons is also economic. The Brazilian economy has done very poorly. If you look at the economy from 1990 onwards till 2021, they just achieved an economic growth of 2.4% average, which is very low compared to the resources that this country has, which also indicates that whether it was the parties of the left or the right, they have really failed to achieve much of economic growth because of poor management,
Indeed,
bad governance, and so on. So people are unhappy on both sides. So economic reason is also another factor to understand that why there is so much of protest, confrontation, divisions in Brazil. One doesn't know, one can't say for sure that this is going to heal up anytime soon. This is a global phenomena. And unless the political class sort of decides to have some sort of dialogue, understanding, I'm afraid that these divisions they will continue to simmer, maybe below the surface.
Okay. Fair enough. Looks like, a lot of work needs to be done there. Let's bring in General Katoch here as well. General Katoch, you earlier spoke about, some of the reasons or perhaps factors which might lead to these situations. But again, when we're trying to find out ways to ensure that these incidents do not get repeated, that's one. And two, perhaps, as Mr. Gupta was saying, bridge that divide between the far right and the far left. How do we do that? Ensure that the democratic institutions are respected, the people's mandate is respected and accepted as well.
Vishal, very frankly, it is my opinion that the majority of people will not really be interested in the violence. You see, so this violence is created. And to create violence, you require an organization and you require huge finances. So you've got an organization, you've got finances, and then you create that violence. And you will always find enough susceptible people who will go in for it. We don't require millions of people to get onto the streets. You just require a few thousand. We saw what happened to Delhi when a few thousand people actually tried to bring down the city, trying to bring down the capital in India during Republic Day. So this is inspired both internally and by external forces. Both of them will be at play as far as such incidences are concerned. And merely having a dialogue between the polarized societies is not going to work. You require mature leaders on both sides, leaders who are prepared to accept the constitution, the electoral mandate. Now, if they're not prepared to accept the electoral mandate, you are going to go down this path. I think that is one of the factors. The second thing is, I'm still very concerned about things like what the word very specifically I used is toolkits, because they present a danger even to countries like India. Now, fortunately, we have got a very resilient society, and since independence, all election mandates have been, the power transfer has been absolutely peaceful, regardless of political differences and regardless of whichever way it has gone. Even within the states, the power has changed hands in a very mature manner. But I'm seeing increasingly that there are people who are trying to destabilize the society, even in India, and we need to be careful of those trends. The toolkit brigade, which I call them, they will be harmful to society, and they have to be called out before they can actually create damage.
Okay.
In Brazil, what we saw was an organized attempt to create violence. It was not spontaneous. The spontaneity, we know how spontaneity occurs. This was organized violence.
Okay.
And I think it is up to the security forces and the judiciary, which themselves have been compromised in favor of the former president. I don't know how they're going to sort out that problem, but ultimately it is the administration also which they need to sort out where the larger problem lies. And the larger problem is not within the people of Brazil, regardless of the fact that they are going through a bad inflationary period.
Okay.
Vishal.
Okay. We'll bring this discussion to end with the last question to Miss Berry here. Miss Berry, what happens now in Brazil vis-a-vis this incident and vis-a-vis the ongoing, tussle between the former president and the present president on the election results? There is a legal process as well involved here. So where does it move from here onwards?
Yeah. So I think it needs a really mature handling of the situation by the current president Lula as to how does he deal with it. First, in terms of his political opponents with vis-a-vis Bolsonaro, he has accused Bolsonaro for creating this. That he said that he has fled to Florida. So the fact that he should be back in Brazil is something that he is going to move for. That is one. Secondly, within the security forces, there has to be a rethink, relook at the situation. How are they going to avoid these kind of happening again if they were really contrived and as General Katoch has talked about, the idea is that to look at the social media very carefully. The first thing that the government has done is to, put a bar on the social media handles and things like that. So it is a very tricky situation. How the country comes out depends on how the presidency deals with it. But I am very confident of President Lula. He has been a very responsible president in past, and hopefully he will try to make amends and come for a all government kind of an approach, talk to the other parties. He has already taken some steps in talking to some of the other party members, maybe, so that could be one of the ways of coming out of this
particular
thing.
Situation.
And for countries like India, which are looking at the global south in a big way, I think we would like to retain Brazil as an important partner. We look at President Lula as a reliable partner. from past, and we'd like to engage with Brazil in the coming future.
Okay, indeed, and we'll have a detailed discussion on India-Brazil relations and the future there as well later on this show as well. Thank you so much, Ms. Berry, General Katoch, and Mr. Gupta as well for sharing your views and insight as our experts were pointing out various aspects of the situation in Brazil where supporters of former President Bolsonaro on Sunday ransacked the constitutional institutions in the country, the Congress, the Supreme Court, the presidential palace as well. The situation as of now is reported as tense but under control. We'll keep a close watch on all the developments there and keep on bringing you all the details on this as well as various other topics. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.